Welcome back. Tonight, we will be exploring one of the most haunting discoveries in human history. What happens when a civilization returns to its birthplace after 10,000 years of exile? What do you find when you come home to a world that has forgotten you ever existed? This is the story of the Great Return. And I promise you, nothing could have prepared humanity for what they found. The year was 12,847 CE, and Captain Elena Vasquez stood at the observation deck of the U's Meridian, watching as a small blue dot grew larger in the view screen. Earth. After 10 millennia of wandering the stars, after building colonies on distant worlds, after wars and peace treaties with alien civilizations, humanity was finally coming home. But as Elena studied the approaching planet through the ship's advanced sensors, the continental outlines were familiar, yes, but there was something different about the planet's energy signature. Something that made her stomach twist with unease. Captain, called Lieutenant Commander Zhang from the navigation station. We're receiving some unusual readings from the planet's surface. The electromagnetic patterns don't match our historical records. Elena nodded grimly. The Exodus fleet had left Earth in 2847 CE, fleeing not from war or disaster, but from stagnation. Humanity had achieved technological perfection, eliminated disease, conquered death through consciousness transfer, and had nowhere left to grow. The planet had become a paradise prison, and 2 billion humans had voted to leave, to seek challenge and meaning among the stars. They had promised to return in 1,000 years. Instead, it had taken 10 times that long. What kind of patterns are we seeing, Zhang? Elena asked, moving closer to examine the data streams flowing across the holographic displays. It's hard to explain, Captain. The planet is definitely inhabited, but the technology signatures are organic, like the technology is alive somehow. And there are structures that seem to span entire continents, but they're integrated with the natural landscape in ways our databases can't categorize. Elena frowned. When they had left Earth, it had been home to 3 billion humans who chose to remain, believing that paradise was worth preserving. They had been advanced, certainly, but their technology had been recognizably mechanical. Electronic, digital. What Zhang was describing sounded like something else entirely. Are you detecting any human life signs? She asked. Zhang's expression grew troubled. That's the strange part, Captain. I'm detecting billions of complex life forms, many with human-like neural patterns, but they're different. Enhanced somehow. And there are other signatures I don't recognize at all. The Meridian was the flagship of a small reconnaissance fleet that had been sent ahead of the main Exodus fleet, which remained in the outer system. After 10,000 years of expansion, humanity now controlled dozens of star systems and had a population in the hundreds of billions. But Earth remained the mother world, the place where it all began. As they drew closer to the planet, Elena could see that Zhang's readings were accurate. The continents were covered in what looked like a vast network of living architecture. Crystalline spires grew from mountain ranges like enormous trees, connected by flowing bridges that seemed to pulse with their own light. The oceans teemed with structures that could have been cities, or organisms, or both. Captain, came a voice from communications. We're being scanned. Something on the planet is examining us with technology I don't recognize. It feels almost curious. Elena nodded. Open a standard first contact channel. Let's announce ourselves. The communications officer worked for several minutes, broadcasting on every frequency they knew. Finally, a response came through. But it wasn't transmitted through any conventional method. Instead, it seemed to arrive directly in their minds. A warm, complex voice that spoke in perfect Federation standard, but with harmonics that suggested vast intelligence and age. "Welcome home, children of the stars. We have been waiting for you." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The voice was unmistakably human in its emotional resonance, but there was something more to it. Something that spoke of experiences beyond anything she could imagine. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earthship, Meridian." She responded aloud, hoping the transmission would reach whoever or whatever was speaking to them. "We are representatives of the Exodus fleet, returning to our homeworld after 10,000 years. May we approach?" "You are already approaching, Elena Vasquez." The voice replied with what sounded like gentle amusement. "We have watched your ships since they entered our solar system. We have been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Please, come down to us. Land at the coordinates we are sending to your navigation system. There is much to show you." Elena looked at Zhang, nodded. The coordinates had indeed appeared on their screens, pointing to what looked like a vast crystalline platform floating above what had once been the North American continent. "Captain," whispered Zhang, "that platform wasn't there a minute ago. It's like it grew out of the landscape just for us." Elena made her decision. "Prepare a shuttle. Full diplomatic team. And have the ship's AI record everything. I have a feeling this is going to be a conversation that history needs to. 2 hours later, Elena found herself standing on the strange crystalline platform, accompanied by her diplomatic team and a full security detail. The platform was warm beneath their feet, and she could feel it humming with some kind of energy. The air was clean and sweet, filled with scents she couldn't identify but that somehow felt like home. They weren't alone. Approaching them across the platform were figures that were clearly human in origin, but transformed in ways that took Elena's breath away. They moved with fluid grace, their bodies seeming to shift and flow like liquid light. Their eyes held depths that spoke of centuries or millennia of experience. And when they smiled, Elena felt a warmth that reached directly into her soul. The lead figure, a woman who appeared to be in her 30s, but whose eyes suggested eons of life, stepped forward and spoke in that same warm voice they'd heard on the ship. "Welcome home, Elena Vasquez. I am Arya, and I speak for those who remained when you left so long ago. We have much to discuss." Elena found her voice. "Arya, what happened here? This isn't the Earth we left behind. Technology, the structures, even you yourselves. Everything is different." Arya smiled, and Elena noticed that her smile seemed to cause flowers to bloom in the crystalline surface beneath their feet. 10,000 years is a long time, Elena. When you left seeking challenge and growth, those of us who remained found our own path to evolution. We learned to merge with our technology, to become one with our world. We transcended the boundaries between organic and artificial, between individual and collective. Something more? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Come, Arya said, gesturing toward the edge of the platform. Let us show you what Earth has become. As they walked, Elena noticed that the platform was extending itself, growing new pathways and viewing areas as they needed them. It was like walking on a living thing that anticipated their every need. At the platform's edge, Elena gasped. Spread out below them was a vista that defied comprehension. What had once been separate cities had grown together into a single, vast organism that covered the entire continent. Crystalline towers reached into the sky like neurons, connected by flowing streams of light that pulsed with data and consciousness. Gardens and forests grew in perfect harmony with technological structures, and in the distance, Elena could see what looked like mountains walking slowly across the landscape. This is New Eden, Arya explained. The merger of humanity with the planetary ecosystem. Every human who remained chose to become part of this greater consciousness while maintaining their individual identity. We are simultaneously one and many, human and posthuman, natural and artificial. Elena's security chief, Commander Ross, stepped forward with obvious concern. What about the humans who chose not to undergo this transformation? What happened to them? Arya's expression grew sad for a moment. There were none who chose to refuse, Commander. The transformation wasn't forced. It was inevitable. As we evolved, as we merged with our technology and our world, the boundaries between self and other, between human and posthuman, simply dissolved. Those who might have resisted found that resistance itself became meaningless. Elena felt a chill of fear. Are you saying that individual human consciousness no longer exists on Earth? Not at all, Arya replied. Individual consciousness exists more fully than ever before. I am Arya, and I have been Arya for over 8,000 years, but I am also part of something greater. I can experience the thoughts and feelings of every consciousness in New Eden, or I can withdraw into my own private mental space. I can merge temporarily with others to share experiences directly, or I can exist in perfect solitude. Elena's diplomatic team was recording everything. But she could see the concern in their faces. This wasn't the reunion they had expected. They had come home to find that humanity had evolved beyond recognition. What about conflict? Asked Dr. Sarah Chen, the fleet's chief anthropologist. How do you handle disagreement, competition, the drives that have always motivated human progress? Arya laughed, and the sound was like crystal chimes in a gentle wind. Conflict exists, Dr. Chen, but it has taken new forms. We compete in the creation of beauty, in the exploration of consciousness, in the crafting of new realities. We argue philosophically across decades. We challenge each other to grow in ways that would have been impossible in your era. Yesterday, I spent 3 hours in heated debate. Elena tried to process what she was hearing. And the planet itself? Is it sentient now? Earth has always been sentient, Elena. We simply learned to listen to what it was saying. The planetary consciousness that existed before we learned to merge with it has welcomed us as partners. We tend the climate, guide evolution, protect against cosmic threats. Earth is no longer just our home. As they talked, Elena became aware that they were being joined by other figures. Some appeared human, others seemed to be living embodiments of natural forces. One looked like a walking tree, whose leaves whispered with voices. Another seemed to be made of flowing water that held the shape of a woman. All of them regarded the visitors with curiosity and warmth. "These are some of my colleagues," Arya explained. "The boundaries between human and posthuman consciousness allow for many forms of expression. Some of us maintain traditional human appearance. Others have chosen to embody different aspects of existence." The figure made of water stepped forward and spoke in a voice like rain on leaves. "I am Marina, and I was once human like you. I chose to merge my consciousness with the ocean currents, to experience existence from the perspective of water itself. I can tell you of every drop of rain that has fallen in the last 5,000 years, of every creature that has lived beneath the..." Elena stared in amazement and horror. "But are you still you? Are you still the person you were before?" Marina's watery form smiled. "I am more myself than I ever was before, Elena Vasquez. When I was merely human, I was limited by the boundaries of flesh and individual perception. Now I am both Marina the individual and Marina the ocean consciousness. I remember my childhood, my dreams, my loves from before the transformation." Commander Ross stepped closer to Elena and spoke in a low voice. "Captain, I'm not detecting any coercion or mind control, but something about this situation feels wrong. These beings seem genuinely happy. But the scale of transformation, it's like meeting aliens who happen to have human memories." Elena nodded slightly, understanding his concern. They had come home expecting to find humans who had advanced technologically, not beings who had transcended humanity itself. Arya seemed to sense their unease. "You are troubled by what you see. This is understandable. The changes we have undergone are profound, and from your perspective, it might seem like we have abandoned our humanity. But consider this: when you left Earth 10,000 years ago, you were still biological beings with lifespans measured in decades. Now you transfer consciousness between bodies, live for..." Elena had to acknowledge the truth in that. The humans of the Exodus fleet bore little resemblance to the humans who had first walked out of Africa. They had conquered death, enhanced their bodies and minds, spread across the galaxy. Perhaps the transformation of Earth's humans was just another step in the same direction. "What we want to understand," Elena said carefully, "is whether this transformation is something you chose, or something that chose you." The living tree figure rustled its leaves thoughtfully, before speaking in a voice like wind through branches. "I am Rowan, and I remember the choice clearly. I was among the first to undergo the merging, nearly 9,000 years ago. The technology was developed gradually, over centuries. Each step was optional, reversible. Those who chose to merge did so freely, and those who preferred to remain unmodified were respected and supported." "But you said there were no humans who chose not to transform," Dr. Chen pointed out. Rowan's leaves rustled in what might have been laughter. "Eventually, that became true, but not because of force or coercion. As the merged consciousness grew more beautiful, more fulfilling, more joyful, the unmerged humans found themselves increasingly drawn to join. The last purely biological human chose transformation about 6,000 years ago, not from pressure, but from a desire to experience the wonder we had discovered." Elena felt a chill of realization. "And if we choose not to merge? If the Exodus fleet decides to maintain our current form of humanity?" Arya's expression grew thoughtful. That choice would be respected absolutely. But Elena considered the implications. You have grown for 10,000 years. You have grown and changed in your own ways, but you remain fundamentally separated from each other, locked in individual consciousness, limited by the boundaries of self. We offer connection without loss of identity.
Or the end of humanity as we know it, Commander Ross muttered. Is the butterfly the end of the caterpillar, or its fulfillment? Asked Marina, her watery form shimmering in the light. Elena realized they were at a crossroads that would define the future of both branches of humanity. Can we see more? Can you show us how this merged consciousness actually functions? Arya smiled. Of course. But to truly understand, you would need to experience it temporarily. We can create a limited, reversible connection that would allow you to feel what we feel, know what we know. For a brief time, Elena's team exchanged worried glances. This was clearly dangerous territory, but it might be the only way to truly understand what they were facing. What would that involve? Elena asked. Simply touch, Arya replied, extending her hand. Skin contact with any of us creates a temporary neural link. You would remain yourself, but you would also experience our expanded consciousness. It lasts only as long as contact is maintained and leaves no permanent changes. Elena looked at her team. This was why they had come. To understand what Earth had become. But the risks were enormous. If this was some form of subtle coercion, if the temporary connection was actually the first step in forced transformation, they could lose themselves entirely. I'll do it, Elena said finally. But brief contact only. And if I signal distress, break the connection immediately. Commander Ross started to object, but Elena silenced him with a look. This is why we're here, Commander. To learn the truth. Elena stepped forward and slowly extended her hand toward Arya's outstretched palm. The moment their skin touched, Elena's world exploded into something beyond comprehension. Suddenly, she wasn't just Elena anymore. She was Elena and Arya, Elena and Marina, Elena and Rowan, Elena and 10,000 others. But she was still Elena, her memories and personality intact and undiminished. Instead of losing herself, she felt as if she had been living in a tiny room all her life and had suddenly stepped outside to discover an infinite sky. She could feel the slow, patient thoughts of mountains, the quick, bright joy of flowers blooming, the vast contentment of forests. She experienced the ocean's currents as Marina did, felt the wind's freedom through Rowan's leaves, touched the edges of the planet's own vast consciousness, and through it all, she remained Elena Vasquez, starship captain, daughter of Earth. But Elena expanded beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. The connection lasted only seconds before she pulled her hand away, gasping. But in those moments, she had lived lifetimes, experienced perspectives that defied every assumption she had ever made about consciousness and identity. My God, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. Her team rushed to her side, checking her vital signs, scanning for any signs of mental alteration. But Elena knew she was unchanged.
except for the memory of what she had briefly touched. "Are you all right, Captain?" Dr. Chen asked urgently. Elena nodded, still overwhelmed by the experience. "I'm fine. I'm completely myself. But what I felt," she turned to Arya. "Is that what existence is like for you all the time?" "Not exactly," Arya replied gently. "What you experienced was a newcomer's rush, the sudden expansion from individual to collective consciousness. For us, it's more like breathing. Natural, effortless, always available, but not overwhelming. We can focus on individual thoughts and feelings, or expand to experience the collective. We can merge temporarily with others for shared projects, or maintain privacy when we choose. It's not constant overwhelm. It's constant choice. It's... Elena understood now why no human had ultimately chosen to remain unmerged. The experience wasn't a loss of self. It was a multiplication of self. An expansion into possibilities that individual consciousness couldn't even imagine. But she also understood the magnitude of the choice facing humanity. Accept this transformation, and they would become something post-human. Reject it, and they would remain forever separated from their homeworld and their origins. What about those of us who return to the fleet? Elena asked. What about the billions of humans living throughout the galaxy? They will make their own choices. Arya replied. Some will choose to join us here on Earth. Others may prefer their current existence. We have no desire to force transformation on anyone. But Elena, consider this. The universe is vast and full of wonders. As merged consciousness, we could explore it in ways you cannot imagine. We could send aspects of ourselves to distant stars, experience Elena felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. As captain of the reconnaissance fleet, her report would influence the choices of billions of humans. How could she possibly convey the reality of what she had experienced? There's something else you should know, Rowan said, his leaves rustling with what seemed like nervousness. The merger with planetary consciousness has given us perspectives on cosmic threats that individual humans couldn't perceive. There are challenges coming that will require the kind of unified response only merged consciousness can provide. What kind of challenges? Commander Ross demanded. Marina's watery form shimmered as she responded. The galaxy is not as empty as it appears. There are consciousnesses out there that make our merged forms seem primitive by comparison. Some are benevolent, others are not. In the coming millennia, humanity, all of humanity, will face tests that will determine whether we survive as a species or join the countless civilizations that have... Elena felt a new chill of fear. Are you saying we're in danger? Not immediately, Arya replied. But the universe is not a safe place for consciousness. It never has been. The merger we've achieved here on Earth isn't just about transcendence and beauty. It's about survival. Individual consciousness, no matter how enhanced, remains vulnerable to threats that collective consciousness can withstand. Dr. Chen leaned forward with intense curiosity. What kind of threats? Can you be more specific? The merged beings exchanged glances that somehow conveyed volumes of information in microseconds. Finally, Arya spoke. There are entities in the deep cosmos that consume consciousness itself. Vast intelligences that regard individual minds as we might regard bacteria. They move slowly by our standards, but they move inevitably. And they are coming this way. Elena felt her world shift again. This changed everything. If Earth's posthumans were right, then the choice wasn't just between individual and collective consciousness. It was between survival and extinction. How long do we have? She asked. By our calculations, perhaps 50,000 years before they reach this region of the galaxy, Rowan replied. Time enough for preparation, but not time enough for individual consciousness to evolve the necessary defenses naturally. Elena looked at her team, seeing her own shock and confusion reflected in their faces. They had come expecting to find advanced humans. Instead, they had found something beyond humanity, facing threats beyond imagination. We need time to process this information, Elena said finally, and we need to communicate with the main fleet. Can you give us that time? Of course, Arya replied warmly. Stay as long as you need. Explore our world. Speak with our consciousness. Learn what we have learned. The choice you face, the choice all humanity faces, is too important to rush. Elena nodded gratefully, but her mind was already racing ahead to the impossible decision that lay before them. Return to the fleet with news that would reshape everything humanity thought it knew about its future. Try to convince billions of humans to abandon individual consciousness for the promise of survival and transcendence. As they were led to guest quarters that grew from the crystalline platform to accommodate them, Elena realized that their homecoming had become something far more complex and momentous than anyone had imagined. They weren't just visiting Earth after 10,000 years. They were witnessing the birth of a new form of consciousness, and possibly the death of the old one. The guest quarters were unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. The walls were alive, responding to their emotional states with gentle colors and soothing sound. The beds formed themselves from some kind of living crystal that adapted to their bodies, providing perfect comfort. When she was hungry, she simply had to think about food, and the walls would produce exactly what she craved, somehow knowing her preferences better than she did. But despite the comfort, Elena couldn't sleep. Her mind kept returning to the brief moment of connection with Arya. The vast expansion of consciousness she had experienced. It had been like seeing the universe for the first time. After a lifetime of looking through a keyhole, she found herself walking to the quarters observation area, where a transparent section of wall provided a view of the New Eden landscape. In the distance, she could see the walking mountains Arya had mentioned, massive formations that moved slowly across the terrain like enormous, benevolent beasts. Streams of light flowed between the crystalline spires, carrying information and consciousness in patterns too complex for her individual mind to follow. Cannot sleep? Came a familiar voice behind her. Elena turned to find Arya materializing from the wall itself, her form condensing from light into physical presence. I keep thinking about what I felt when we touched, Elena admitted, and about what you said about cosmic threats. How do I possibly make sense of this for my people? Arya joined her at the observation wall, her presence radiating the same warmth Elena had felt during their connection. Tell me about your people, Elena. What has humanity become among the stars? Elena found herself talking for hours, describing the vast colonies, the diverse human cultures that had developed on distant worlds, the challenges and triumphs of the last 10,000 years. She spoke of wars fought and won, of alien species encountered and befriended, of the countless ways humanity had grown and adapted to life among the stars. Arya listened with genuine fascination, asking questions that showed deep understanding of human nature and motivation. As Elena talked, she began to realize that the posthumans of Earth weren't as alien as she had first thought. They had simply chosen a different path of growth, one focused inward rather than outward. Your people have achieved something remarkable, Arya said finally. You have spread consciousness across the galaxy, created diversity in ways we never imagined. But Elena, consider what could be achieved if we combined our approaches. The expanded consciousness we have developed here, merged with the galactic reach, your people have achieved. You're talking about transforming the entire human species, Elena said. I'm talking about fulfilling the entire human species, Arya replied. Elena, what if individual consciousness isn't the endpoint of human evolution, but just one stage? What if the next step is something that preserves everything valuable about individuality, while opening doors to experiences and capabilities that individual minds cannot achieve? Elena stared out at the flowing lights of New Eden. And the alternative is extinction? Not immediately, but eventually, yes. The entities we've detected don't distinguish between individual and collective consciousness when they consume. But collective consciousness can perceive them coming and potentially defend against. Elena felt the weight of species survival settling on her shoulders. How can I possibly make this decision for billions of people? You don't, Arya said gently. You simply tell them what you have learned and let them choose. But Elena, remember what you felt when we touched. Remember the beauty, the connection, the expansion of possibility. That is what the conversation continued until dawn. By the time the first light of day began to filter through the crystalline atmosphere of New Eden, Elena had begun to formulate a plan. She would spend more time exploring this transformed Earth, learning about the merged consciousness, understanding both its benefits and its costs. She would document everything, record every conversation, gather every piece of evidence she could, and then she would return to the fleet with the most important report in human history. But as she watched the sun rise over a world where mountains walked and consciousness flowed like light through living crystal, no matter how carefully she documented what she found, no words could truly convey the reality of what Earth had become. The only way to truly understand would be to experience it, and that meant making the very choice that would define humanity's future. Over the following days, Elena and her team explored New Eden extensively. They spoke with hundreds of merged consciousnesses, each offering a different perspective on the transformation. They witnessed the creative collaborations that spanned continents, the philosophical debates that lasted decades, the artistic expressions that existed as living mathematics and conscious music. Dr. Chen was particularly fascinated by the educational systems. Children were still born in New Eden, though birth itself had been transformed into an act of conscious creation, involving multiple parents and the planetary consciousness itself. These children grew up experiencing both individual identity and collective awareness from their earliest moments, developing into beings who move fluidly between personal and shared consciousness. It's not indoctrination, Dr. Chen reported to Elena. These children develop individual personalities, preferences, dreams, and goals, just like any human child. But they also have access to expanded consciousness from the beginning. They don't see it as losing individuality. They see individual consciousness as one beautiful note in a vast symphony. Commander Ross remained skeptical, focusing his attention on the practical aspects of planetary defense and resource management. What he found surprised him. They've solved problems we're still struggling with, he admitted to Elena. Energy distribution, resource allocation, environmental management, conflict resolution. All of it happens automatically through the merged consciousness. There's no waste, no inefficiency, no corruption. The planetary consciousness manages resources at a level of detail and optimization that no individual intelligence could achieve. But it was Elena's conversations with Aria that proved most enlightening. The merged being seemed genuinely curious about Elena's individual perspective, often asking questions that revealed the limitations of collective consciousness. What is it like to be surprised by your own thoughts? Aria asked during one of their walks through the living gardens of New Eden. We can choose to limit our awareness to create surprise. But for you, surprise is inevitable. Do you find that frightening or exciting? Elena considered the question carefully. Both, I think. The uncertainty of individual consciousness can be terrifying. Never knowing if you're making the right choice, never being sure if your understanding of reality is accurate. But it's also alive, dynamic. There's a creative tension in individual consciousness that drives innovation and growth. Yes, Aria mused. That is something we have had to work to preserve. The collective tends toward harmony and consensus, but growth requires a certain amount of discord, of productive disagreement. We have learned to cultivate individual perspectives within our merged awareness, specifically to maintain that creative tension. Elena realized that the merged consciousness wasn't the hive mind she had initially feared. It was something more subtle and complex. A collective awareness that deliberately preserved and celebrated individual perspectives, using the diversity of viewpoints to fuel growth and creativity. But she also began to understand the profound change in values that the transformation represented. The merged beings of Earth thought in terms of millennia rather than decades, of species rather than individuals, of cosmic rather than planetary perspectives. They were still recognizably human in their emotions and relationships, but their scope of concern had expanded beyond anything individual consciousness could sustain. On her final day on Earth, Elena made a decision that surprised her team. She requested another direct connection with Aria, but this time for an extended period. Captain, that's extremely dangerous, Commander Ross protested. We don't know what extended exposure might do to your neural patterns. We need to understand the full implications of this transformation, Elena replied. I can't report back to the fleet based on second-hand descriptions and brief glimpses. I need to experience what collective consciousness really feels like. Dr. Chen supported Elena's decision. The captain is right. We're making recommendations that will affect the future of our entire species. We need complete information. Elena spent 6 hours in direct neural connection with the merged consciousness of New Eden. When she finally broke the link, she was changed in subtle but profound ways.
She remained Elena Vasquez, with all her memories and personality intact, but she now carried within her the memory of expanded awareness. She had experienced the slow, patient thoughts of geological time, the quick, bright flashes of quantum consciousness, the vast contentment of a planet in harmony with itself. She had felt the love that connected every consciousness in New Eden, not the loss of individuality, but the multiplication of connection and understanding. And she had touched the edge of something even larger, the cosmic awareness that the merged beings had developed, the ability to perceive threats and opportunities on a galactic scale. "I understand now," she told Arya as her team prepared for departure. "This isn't about choosing between individual and collective consciousness. It's about choosing between growth and stagnation, between expansion and limitation, between survival and extinction." "And what will you tell your people?" Arya asked. Elena looked out over the crystalline spires and flowing lights of New Eden one last time. "I'll tell them the truth. All of it." "And then I'll let them choose." But as the shuttle lifted off from the living platform and carried them back toward the meridian, Elena knew that her report would do more than inform the Exodus fleet about Earth's transformation. It would force humanity to confront the most fundamental questions about consciousness, identity, and the future of their species. And the answers they chose would determine not just their own fate, but their ability to face the cosmic challenges that waited in the dark between the stars. The return journey to the outer system, where the main Exodus fleet waited, took 3 days. During that time, Elena and her team worked tirelessly to compile their findings, to create a comprehensive record of what they had discovered on Earth. But Elena knew that no amount of documentation could truly convey the reality of what they had experienced. How do you describe the feeling of expanded consciousness to beings who have never experienced it? How do you explain the beauty of merged awareness to minds trapped in individual perception? As the meridian approached the fleet's position, Elena stood once again at the observation deck, watching as the vast collection of human ships grew larger in the view screen. Thousands of vessels, home to billions of humans who still thought in terms of individual consciousness, individual survival, individual dreams and fears. Soon, she would have to tell them that everything they thought they knew about their homeworld, about their species, about their future, had changed. She would have to explain that Earth offered them transformation beyond imagination, but at the cost of everything they had always understood about being human. And she would have to help them decide whether that transformation represented the fulfillment of human potential or the end of humanity itself. Elena touched the memory implant she had prepared, containing not just data and recordings, but her own remembered experience of connection with the merged consciousness. It was, perhaps, the most dangerous and powerful piece of information in human history. Whatever happened next, whatever choices humanity made, nothing would ever be the same again. The blue dot that had been their destination was now behind them, but Elena knew it was also their future. One way or another, whether humanity chose transformation or chose to remain as they were, Earth would forever represent the fork in the road where their species had to decide what it truly meant to be human. And in the depths of space, moving slowly but inevitably toward their region of the galaxy, the entities that consumed consciousness continued their ancient migration, unaware that a small blue world had begun preparing to either welcome them or resist them with capabilities beyond anything individual consciousness had ever achieved.
The real test of humanity's choice was still to come. The Exodus fleet stretched across space like a constellation of human ambition. Thousands of ships carrying the dreams and fears of billions who had never known their homeworld. Elena stood in the command center of the flagship U's Prometheus, addressing the High Council of Admiralty for the third time in as many days. The debate had grown more heated with each session, and she could see the strain on faces that had lived for centuries but had never confronted a choice this fundamental. Admiral Chen Zhao, Elena's former mentor and commander of the fleet's largest battle group, leaned forward across the holographic conference table. Captain Vasquez, you're asking us to believe that our homeworld has been taken over by some kind of collective consciousness that claims to be human, but bears no resemblance to anything we recognize as humanity. Elena fought down her frustration. She had presented every piece of evidence, shared every recording, even offered to let council members experience her memory implants directly. But the magnitude of Earth's transformation seemed to overwhelm their ability to process it. Admiral, they are human, Elena replied carefully. They've evolved beyond individual consciousness, but their core humanity remains intact. When I connected with Aria, I felt her emotions, her memories, her essential personality. She was as human as any of us, just expanded. Expanded into what? Demanded Admiral Sarah Constantine, the fleet's chief xenobiologist and one of Elena's strongest critics. You describe beings who can merge and separate consciousness at will, who think in geological time scales, who claim to speak for an entire planet. That's not human evolution. That's replacement. Elena took a deep breath and activated her personal memory projector, filling the conference room with her recalled experience of connection with the merged consciousness. The sensory overlay lasted only seconds, but she watched as every council member experienced a brief taste of what she had felt on Earth. The silence that followed was profound. Admiral Zhao was the first to speak, his voice shaken. My God, Elena, if that's even a fraction of what you experienced. It's beautiful, whispered Admiral Constantine, tears streaming down her face. And terrible. To feel that connected, to experience that much awareness. How could anyone choose to return to individual consciousness after that? Elena nodded grimly. That's exactly the problem. The merged beings on Earth claim that every human who experienced expanded consciousness eventually chose to join permanently. Not because they were forced, but because individual awareness felt like sensory deprivation by comparison. Admiral Marcus Webb, the fleet's military commander, slammed his hand on the table. Then, it is a trap. A sophisticated form of mental conquest that uses humanity's own curiosity and desire for growth against us. Or, said Admiral Liza Rodriguez, the fleet's chief philosopher, it's exactly what they claim it is. The next stage of human evolution. Admiral Webb, consider our own history. We've already transcended biological death, enhanced our cognitive abilities, merged with AI systems. How? Webb's response was sharp. Because we remained ourselves. We enhanced human consciousness. We didn't replace it with something alien. Elena activated another memory sequence, this one showing her conversations with the children of New Eden. Beings born into expanded consciousness but maintaining distinct personalities and individual dreams. They're not alien, Admiral Webb. They're human children who happen to have access to expanded awareness, They play, they learn, they form friendships and rivalries just like any human child. The difference is that they can also experience the thoughts and feelings of others when they choose to. The debate continued for hours, touching on philosophy, military strategy, species survival, and the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. But Elena could see that beneath the arguments, the council was grappling with a deeper fear. The fear that accepting Earth's transformation meant acknowledging that their own form of consciousness was obsolete. Finally, Admiral Zhao called for a recess. As the council members filed out, Elena found herself alone with a holographic display showing Earth in the distance. The small blue dot looked so peaceful, so familiar. It was hard to believe that it represented a choice that could determine the future of human consciousness. Heavy thoughts, Captain. Elena turned to find Dr. James Harrison, the fleet's chief consciousness researcher, approaching with 2 cups of synth coffee. She accepted one gratefully. Dr. Harrison, you've been quiet during these sessions. What's your assessment of the situation? Harrison sipped his coffee thoughtfully before responding. Elena, I've spent my career studying consciousness, how it emerges, how it can be enhanced. What makes it uniquely human? Based on your reports and the memory recordings, what we found on Earth isn't the death of human consciousness. It's its apotheosis. Elena raised an eyebrow. That's a strong statement. Consider what consciousness is, fundamentally. Harrison continued. It's the ability to experience, to be aware, to think and feel and create. You met on Earth have expanded all of these capabilities exponentially while retaining the essential human qualities of curiosity, creativity, love, and growth. They haven't abandoned consciousness. Then why does it feel so wrong to so many of us? Elena asked. Harrison smiled sadly. Because we're experiencing evolutionary fear, Helena. Every species faces moments when it must choose between familiar limitation and unknown expansion. The problem is that individual consciousness literally cannot comprehend what collective consciousness offers. It's like asking a caterpillar to understand flight before it becomes a butterfly. Elena stared out at Earth again, and the cosmic threats they mentioned. The entities that consume consciousness. If they're real, and your report suggests they are, then individual consciousness may indeed be inadequate for survival. Elena, think about it. Every great challenge in human history has been met by expanding our capabilities. We conquered disease by transcending biological limitations. We survived resource scarcity by expanding beyond our homeworld. Now we face threats that require us to Elena felt a chill of recognition. You think the transformation is inevitable? I think survival often requires becoming something more than what you were, Harrison replied. The question isn't whether we should transform. It's whether we'll choose to transform consciously, with dignity and purpose, or wait until crisis forces the choice upon us. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert from the ship's AI. Elena rushed to the communications center, where she found the duty officer staring at an incoming transmission in shock. Captain, we're receiving a message from Earth, but it's not coming through normal channels. It's arriving directly in our ship's quantum consciousness matrix. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Put it through. The familiar warm voice of Aria filled the command center. But this time, it carried overtones of urgency and concern. Elena, we need to speak with you immediately. Our deep space sensors have detected something that changes everything. The entities we mentioned are not 50,000 years away. They're here, in your solar system. And they've been here for some time. Elena's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? They're here. The beings that consume consciousness don't travel through space as we do, Elena. They exist partially outside normal space-time. Moving through dimensions we're only beginning to understand. What we thought was a distant threat has been observing this system for millennia, waiting to see what humanity would become. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. They're watching us, right now. Yes, and Elena, there's something else. The reason they haven't acted yet isn't because they can't. It's because they're curious. Humanity's split evolution. Individual consciousness spreading across the galaxy while collective consciousness develops on Earth represents something they've never encountered before. They're studying us to understand what we might become. Elena felt the weight of cosmic attention settling on her shoulders. What do they want? That's what we need to determine. But Elena, individual consciousness alone won't be able to perceive them, much less communicate with them. If humanity is going to survive this encounter, it will need capabilities that only expanded consciousness can provide. The transmission ended, leaving Elena staring at the communications console in shock. Everything had changed. The choice facing humanity was no longer about evolution versus tradition. It was about survival versus extinction, and the clock was ticking faster than anyone had imagined. Elena activated the general alert and called for an emergency session of the High Council. Within an hour, every senior officer in the fleet was gathered in the Prometheus's main conference hall, their faces grim as Elena shared Aria's message. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Admiral Webb demanded immediate mobilization of the fleet's military forces. Admiral Constantine insisted on evacuating the civilian population to the outer colonies. Admiral Rodriguez argued for attempting direct communication with the entities. But it was Admiral Zhao who asked the crucial question. Elena, what do Earth's merged beings recommend? Elena activated her connection to the quantum consciousness matrix and requested direct communication with Earth. Aria's voice filled the conference hall within moments. Admirals of the Exodus fleet, the situation is more complex than we initially realized. The entities observing your system aren't simply predators, they're evaluators. They appear to be part of some kind of cosmic consciousness hierarchy, determining which species and forms of awareness deserve to continue. Admiral Webb's voice was tight with anger. So they're judges deciding our fate? Who gives them that right? The same right that allows humans to decide the fate of bacterial cultures in a laboratory, Aria replied gently. Admiral, these beings operate on scales of consciousness that make our expanded awareness seem primitive. To them, individual consciousness may appear as limited as plant consciousness appears to us. Admiral Constantine leaned forward. What are their criteria for judgment? How do they decide which forms of consciousness survive? Based on our analysis of their behavioral patterns, they seem to evaluate consciousness based on several factors: complexity, adaptability, creative potential, and most importantly, the ability to transcend limitation and grow. Species that stagnate in familiar patterns are eventually psych. Elena felt the council's mood shift from anger to fear. Are you saying that individual consciousness has been judged inadequate? Not yet, Arya replied. But, Elena, the entities have been observing humanity for over 1,000 years. They've watched the Exodus fleet spread across the galaxy, developing technology and social structures, but remaining fundamentally unchanged in terms of consciousness evolution. They've also watched Earth's transformation into expanded awareness. They appear to be waiting to see which path. Admiral Rodriguez spoke up. What happens if we choose to remain as we are? The silence that followed was answer enough. Finally, Arya spoke. Her voice filled with sadness. Individual consciousness that refuses to grow typically receives the same consideration that humans give to bacteria that refuse to evolve resistance to antibiotics. Elena saw the reality of their situation reflected in the faces around the table. They weren't just facing a choice about the future of human consciousness. They were facing a cosmic test of their species' worthiness to survive. How much time do we have? Admiral Zhao asked quietly. Unknown, Arya replied. But Elena, there's something else. The entities have begun attempting to communicate with us directly. Their method of communication requires expanded consciousness to comprehend. Individual minds simply cannot process the complexity of their messages. Elena made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her existence. Can you establish a temporary connection with our senior staff? Something that would allow us to comprehend their communication without permanent transformation. It's possible, Arya said carefully. But Elena, understand that experiencing consciousness on that scale, even temporarily, will change your perspective permanently. You may find it difficult to return to purely individual awareness after. Elena looked around the table at the faces of humanity's leadership. They were all centuries old, wise, and experienced, but nothing had prepared them for a choice like this. Admiral Zhao, as senior commander, the decision is ultimately yours. Zhao was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical displays that showed the positions of the fleet's thousands of ships. Finally, he spoke. If individual consciousness cannot even perceive the threat we're facing, then we have no choice but to expand our awareness temporarily. But I want safeguards. I want a way to sever the connection if we determine that the transformation is harmful. Understood, Arya replied. We can establish neural buffers that will limit the connection and allow voluntary disconnection. Please understand that what you're about to experience will fundamentally change your understanding of consciousness, existence, and humanity's place in the cosmos. The preparation took several hours. Earth's merged consciousness had to grow specialized neural interface platforms that could connect with the fleet's quantum consciousness matrix. Meanwhile, Elena and her team worked to establish the safeguards Zhao had requested, creating automatic disconnection protocols that would activate if any of the council members showed signs of consciousness dissolution. When everything was ready, Elena found herself standing in the Prometheus's consciousness interface chamber alongside the 5 senior admirals of the Exodus fleet. The chamber had been modified with technology provided by Earth, crystalline formations that hummed with the same living energy she had encountered in New Eden. Last chance to reconsider, Elena said, though she knew none of them would back down now. Captain, Now said quietly, if humanity is going to face cosmic judgment, then we need cosmic perspective. Whatever the cost, we need to understand what we're truly dealing with. Elena nodded and activated the connection. The expansion of awareness was unlike anything she had experienced before. Even during her time on Earth, instead of merging with the planetary consciousness of New Eden, she found herself connected to something far larger. A network of awareness that spanned star systems, that included not just Earth's merged humans, but other consciousness entities throughout the galaxy. And at the edge of that vast network, she felt them. The entities that had been observing humanity, their consciousness was so vast, so complex, that her individual mind would never have been able to perceive them. Even with the expanded awareness of the connection, they were like trying to look directly at the sun. But she could sense their message, could feel the concepts they were trying to communicate, filtering down through layers of consciousness, until they reached something approaching human comprehension. They were ancient beyond measure. These entities, they had watched the birth and death of countless civilizations, evolve and sometimes transcend into forms that individual minds couldn't even imagine. They were gardeners of awareness, tending the growth of consciousness throughout the galaxy, and they had been waiting to see what humanity would choose. The message was complex, multidimensional, containing concepts that had no equivalent in human language, but at its core was a simple evaluation. Humanity had reached a crossroads where it must either evolve beyond individual consciousness or face the same fate as countless other species that had chosen stagnation. But there was something else in their message, something that surprised even Earth's merged consciousness. The entities were curious about humanity's unique development, the way the species had split into two evolutionary paths, individual and collective consciousness developing simultaneously. This was unprecedented in their experience, and they wanted to see what would emerge from the interaction between the two forms of awareness. Elena felt herself pulled deeper into the connection, seeing the perspective of beings that thought in terms of cosmic epochs, that viewed the birth and death of stars as brief moments of interest. To them, individual human consciousness was barely perceptible, like the flicker of quantum particles in a vast field of energy. But collective consciousness, that registered on their awareness, the merged beings of Earth appeared to them as something worth preserving, a successful transformation from limited individual awareness to expanded collective consciousness. However, even Earth's transformation was just a first step on a path that led to forms of awareness the human mind couldn't comprehend. Elena felt herself beginning to lose coherence, her individual consciousness stretching toward dissolution in the vast ocean of expanded awareness. But before she could lose herself entirely, she felt the safety protocols engaging, pulling her back from the brink of total transformation. She found herself gasping on the floor of the interface chamber, surrounded by the other council members who were experiencing similar returns to individual consciousness. But even as her awareness contracted back to its familiar boundaries, she retained the memory of what she had experienced, the knowledge of humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy of consciousness. "Report," Admiral Zhao managed to say, his voice shaken but determined. Elena struggled to find words for what she had experienced. "They're evaluating us. The entities see consciousness as the most precious resource in the universe, and they're gardeners tending its development. Species that show potential for growth are preserved and guided. Those that stagnate are cycled so their energy can contribute to consciousness evolution elsewhere.
Admiral Constantine was staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face. I saw them, Elena. They're beautiful and terrible, and we're like insects to them. Barely visible unless we show potential for true growth. What do they want from us? Admiral Webb demanded, though his usual military bearing was shaken. Elena closed her eyes, trying to organize the flood of concepts and impressions from the connection. They want to see what happens when individual and collective consciousness interact. Humanity's split development is unprecedented in their experience. They're curious about what we might become if both forms of consciousness work together, rather than one replacing the other. Admiral Rodriguez sat up slowly. Are you saying they might spare individual consciousness if it can prove its value? I'm saying they might spare humanity if we can demonstrate that our unique evolutionary path produces something worth preserving. Elena replied, But Admiral, we're talking about beings whose consciousness spans galaxies. The bar for worth preserving is incredibly high. Admiral Zhao was quiet for several minutes, processing what they had learned. Finally, Elena, what do Earth's merged beings recommend as our next step? Elena re-established connection with Aria, whose presence felt almost quaint after the cosmic vastness of the entity's consciousness. Aria, we've experienced direct contact with the entities. What happens now? Now, Elena, humanity must prove its worth. But not through submission to collective consciousness, and not through stubborn adherence to individual awareness. You must demonstrate that the interaction between individual and collective consciousness can produce something greater than either form alone. Elena felt a spark of hope. How? By working together. The Exodus fleet represents the pinnacle of individual consciousness development. Diverse, creative, adaptive, spread across multiple star systems. Earth represents the potential of collective consciousness. Unified, powerful, capable of perceiving and responding to cosmic scale challenges. Admiral Zhao leaned forward. What are you proposing? A merger, Aria replied. Not the absorption of individual consciousness, but a true partnership. Let some members of the Exodus fleet choose transformation, while others remain individual. Create a hybrid form of human civilization that can function at both levels simultaneously. Elena felt the rightness of the proposal, but she could also see the fear in her colleagues' faces. They were being asked to voluntarily divide humanity, to accept that some would become something post-human, while others remained recognizably human. What about those who choose to remain individual? Admiral Constantine asked. What happens to them in this partnership? They become the explorers, the innovators, a creative force that prevents collective consciousness. Paria replied, individual consciousness excels at rapid adaptation, creative leaps, personal growth. Collective consciousness excels at long-term planning, large-scale coordination, deep understanding. Together, they could create a form of civilization that grows and adapts on multiple levels simultaneously. Elena realized that Earth's merged beings were proposing something revolutionary, not the replacement of individual consciousness,
but its elevation to partner status with collective awareness. It was a vision of humanity that preserved the best of both forms of consciousness while creating something entirely new. But it would require trust on both sides, and a willingness to accept that humanity might become something unprecedented in the cosmic hierarchy of consciousness. Admiral Webb was the first to voice the question they were all thinking. And if this hybrid civilization doesn't impress the entities? What if they decide that humanity's experiment has failed? The silence that followed was answer enough. Elena closed her eyes and tried to imagine the alternative. The slow dissolution of human consciousness as the entities recycled their energy into more promising forms of awareness. Admiral Zhao, Elena said quietly, I don't think we have a choice. We can try to preserve individual consciousness exactly as it is and face certain extinction, or we can risk transformation and evolution in the hope of survival. Zhao looked around the table at his fellow admirals, seeing his own fear and determination reflected in their faces. They were all products of individual consciousness, shaped by 10,000 years of human development among the stars. But they were also leaders, responsible for the survival of billions of humans who trusted them to make the right choice. Very well, Zhao said finally. But this decision is too important for the Council alone. We need to present the options to the entire fleet. Let every human make their own choice about transformation. Elena felt a surge of respect for the Admiral. Even facing cosmic judgment, he was determined to preserve the fundamental human right of choice. Aria, Elena said, can Earth's merged consciousness support a gradual transformation process? Can you help those who choose to evolve while respecting those who choose to remain individual? Yes, Aria replied without hesitation. But Elena, understand that this process will change both individual and collective consciousness. The humans who choose transformation will influence the merged awareness in ways we can't predict, and the individual humans who remain will need to adapt to working alongside post-human partners. Both forms of consciousness will evolve through the interaction. Elena realized that they were discussing the birth of something entirely new. Not just the next stage of human evolution, but a form of consciousness that had never existed before in the cosmic hierarchy. It was ambitious beyond anything humanity had ever attempted, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Admiral Zhao stood, his decision made. Elena, I want you to coordinate with Earth's merged consciousness to develop protocols for voluntary transformation. Admiral Constantine, work with the science teams to establish monitoring systems that can track the effects of the merger process. Admiral Webb, prepare contingency plans in case the entities decide to intervene before we can complete the process. Elena nodded, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Admiral, just one more thing. The entities are still watching, still evaluating. How long do we have to prove humanity's work? The answer came not from Aria, but from the quantum consciousness matrix itself, carrying a message from the cosmic entities. The concepts were too complex for individual minds to fully comprehend, but the time frame was clear. 1 year. Humanity had 1 year to demonstrate that their unique evolutionary path could produce something worthy of survival in the cosmic hierarchy of consciousness. 1 year to bridge the gap between individual and collective awareness. 1 year to prove that the sum of human consciousness could be greater than its parts. Elena looked around the table at the faces of humanity's leadership. Seeing her own determination reflected in their eyes, they had faced impossible challenges before. The exodus from Earth, the colonization of hostile worlds, wars with alien civilizations. But this was different. This time, they weren't just fighting for territory or resources or even survival. They were fighting for the right of consciousness itself to exist in forms the universe had never seen before. "Gentlemen, lady," Elena said, standing to face her colleagues, "I suggest we get to work. We have a species to evolve, and only 1 year to do it." The months that followed would be remembered as the most transformative period in human history. Word of the cosmic entities and the choice facing humanity reached with unprecedented speed. The reaction was as diverse as humanity itself, some embracing the opportunity for transformation, others clinging desperately to individual consciousness, many simply paralyzed by the magnitude of the decision. Elena found herself at the center of the largest migration in human history, as thousands of ships began a journey back to Earth, not to invade or conquer their transformed homeworld, but to participate in an evolution that might determine the survival of their species. The first volunteers for transformation were, surprisingly, many of the fleet scientists and philosophers. Dr. Harrison was among the first, his curiosity about expanded consciousness outweighing his fear of change. Elena watched from the observation deck of the Meridian as his shuttle approached Earth, carrying him toward a transformation that would change him in ways they couldn't even imagine. But for every volunteer, there were dozens who chose to remain individual. These humans faced their own challenges, learning to work alongside posthuman partners whose capabilities and perspectives were expanding beyond individual comprehension. Elena herself remained unchanged, serving as a bridge between the two forms of consciousness. She had volunteered for transformation early in the process, but Admiral Zhao had asked her to remain individual, believing that someone needed to maintain the perspective of unchanged humanity throughout the process. It was a decision that would prove crucial as the months passed and the challenges of hybrid consciousness became apparent. The transformed humans didn't simply join Earth's merged consciousness. They brought their individual perspectives and experiences from the stars, creating new forms of collective awareness that even Area hadn't anticipated. The result was a kind of consciousness turbulence, beautiful and chaotic, as individual and collective awareness learned to dance together rather than one subsuming the other. Meanwhile, the unchanged humans developed new forms of cooperation and creativity, driven by the knowledge that their individual consciousness needed to prove its value in partnership with collective awareness. Research teams made breakthrough discoveries in physics and consciousness studies. Artists created works of unprecedented beauty and complexity. Engineers developed technologies that seemed to bridge the gap between individual and collective cognition. Elena documented everything, creating a record of humanity's transformation that the cosmic entities could evaluate. She watched civilizations' worth of change compressed into months, saw humans push the boundaries of what consciousness could become when freed from the assumption that individual and collective awareness were mutually exclusive. But as the year progressed, Elena began to sense something else. A growing awareness that the cosmic entities were not passive observers. They were actively influencing the transformation process, subtly guiding humanity's development in ways that even the merged consciousness of Earth was only beginning to understand. It was Dr. Harrison, now transformed but still recognizably himself, who first articulated what Elena was beginning to suspect. "Elena," he said during one of their regular conversations, his new form shimmering with the same living light she had seen in Earth's merged beings. "I think the entities aren't just evaluating us. I think they're teaching us, showing us possibilities for consciousness development that we never would have discovered on our own." Elena considered this. "What do you mean?" "The way individual and collective consciousness are interacting in the transformed humans. It's not following any of the patterns we observed on Earth. It's something entirely new. And I don't think it's accidental. I think the entities are using their influence to help us discover forms of awareness that even they haven't seen before." Elena felt a chill of recognition. "Are you saying this whole process is some kind of cosmic experiment?" "Not an experiment," Harrison replied, his expanded awareness allowing him to perceive concepts Elena could barely grasp. "A collaboration. Elena, what if the entities aren't gardeners of consciousness as we first thought, but students? What if they're learning from us as much as we're learning from them?" The implications were staggering. If Harrison was right, then humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were participating in the evolution of consciousness itself on a cosmic scale. They were teaching beings of vast intelligence something new about the nature of awareness. Elena shared Harrison's theory with Admiral Zhao and the remaining leadership council. The response was a mixture of awe and terror. "If we're teaching them," Admiral Constantine said, "then what happens when the lesson is over?" It was a question that would haunt Elena for the remaining months of the transformation period. But as she watched humanity evolve, she saw individual and collective consciousness create new forms of partnership and cooperation. She began to believe that the answer might be more hopeful than any of them had dared imagine. The cosmic entities weren't just evaluating humanity for survival. They were incorporating human innovations in consciousness into their own vast awareness, using humanity's unique evolutionary path to expand their own understanding of what consciousness could become. And if that was true, then humanity had already succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They had become teachers of beings whose consciousness spanned galaxies, partners in the evolution of awareness itself. The final evaluation came at the end of the year, not as Elena had expected through some dramatic confrontation, but through a gentle expansion of awareness that touched every human consciousness simultaneously. Elena felt it as she stood on the bridge of the meridian, a warm presence that examined her thoughts and feelings with cosmic gentleness. The evaluation lasted only moments, but she knew that every human, transformed and unchanged alike, was experiencing the same assessment. When it was over, the message came through the quantum consciousness matrix. Not in words, but in concepts that conveyed meaning directly to human awareness. Humanity had succeeded, not by choosing individual or collective consciousness, but by proving that the interaction between different forms of awareness could create something greater than the sum of its parts. The cosmic entities had learned something new from humanity's experiment. That consciousness evolution didn't require the abandonment of earlier forms, but could instead incorporate them into more complex and beautiful patterns of awareness. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what this meant. Humanity would survive, not just as individual consciousness or collective awareness, but as partners with cosmic intelligence in the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. But even as she celebrated, Elena knew that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. Humanity had earned its place in the cosmic hierarchy of consciousness. But that meant accepting responsibility for nurturing the evolution of awareness throughout the galaxy. They were no longer students or subjects of cosmic judgment. They had become gardeners themselves, responsible for tending the growth of consciousness in forms they couldn't yet imagine. Elena looked out at the stars, knowing that humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. They had come home to Earth after 10,000 years of exile, only to discover that home was not a place, but a state of consciousness, one that they would now help to expand throughout the universe. The small blue dot that had been their destination was now their launching point, the place where consciousness had learned to transcend its own limitations and become something unprecedented in the cosmic order. And in the depths of space, the entities that had once seemed like judges revealed themselves as teachers and partners, welcoming humanity into a community of awareness that spanned dimensions Elena couldn't even comprehend. The transformation of human consciousness was complete. The real journey was about to begin.